From your experience, how could you describe Trump's feelings and attitude towards Ukraine and Russia?
Well, I think Trump sees most foreign policy issues through a very small prism. And the prism is what he thinks is in it for Donald Trump. He thinks to begin with that the measure of relations between nations is how well he gets along with the leader of the other nation. So, for example, for reasons I can't explain, he thinks he gets along very well with Vladimir Putin. A few days ago, he said he was the apple of Vladimir Putin's eye, which isn't a compliment I would like to have bestowed on me, but that's Trump thought Putin liked him. And he would then say, isn't it a good thing to have that kind of relationship with a country like Russia? He'd say the same thing about Xi Jinping in China or Kim Jong-un in North Korea. Uh, on the other hand, he did not have good personal relations with the leaders of many of America's allies, not with Theresa May of the United Kingdom, not with Angela Merkel of Germany, not with a number of others. Uh, so it doesn't conform to the historically expected pattern of who you have good relations with. But because Trump sees the world in a very simple way, that's how he makes decisions on foreign policy. So in the case of Ukraine, which he thinks is thoroughly corrupt, which supported Hillary Clinton against him in the 2016 presidential election by putting Joe Biden's son on the board of Burisma, hiding Hillary Clinton's famous computer server, and then again supported Trump's opponent, Joe Biden, in 2020. And he's obviously burned by having gone through the first impeachment, uh, even after his perfect phone call with President Zelensky. So, in personal terms, which everybody has personal feelings, I'm not disputing that, but that's all Donald Trump brings basically to foreign policy. He thinks he's got great relations with Vladimir Putin and not so good relations with Zelensky.
Mhm. And do you think if Trump remained in office, he would have been able to stop Putin from invading Ukraine in 2022?
No, I don't think so. I think what happened was when the whole Ukraine impeachment issue blew up in the United States, carrying through into an election year uh, that was itself consumed with the COVID pandemic, that Putin and the Russians knew enough not to do something like invade Ukraine in the middle of an American election. Because they didn't know what kind of reaction it would provoke. And with COVID overwhelming everything, they had to fear that Trump would look for an excuse to divert people's attention from COVID and that he might have reacted very strongly. Moreover, Putin knew that Trump was skeptical of NATO. And I feel that what Putin did in 2020 basically was wait out the American election. If Trump had won, then he might wait for Trump to withdraw from NATO to weaken the alliance. If Biden won, then he could take his time and size up the new president, which I think he did in Europe in the summer of 2021. I think Putin found him weak. I think he looked at the withdrawal from Afghanistan, saw that as a sign of weakness, and encouraged the invasion. So it was not that Putin feared Trump or that he had a good relationship, so he wasn't going to invade Ukraine. I think it was calculation on Putin's part. May have been right, it may have been wrong, but that's what I think was going through Putin's mind.
Mhm. And do you think if Trump is re-elected, he would be able to stop the war, as he says?
Right. Well, he said he would just get Putin and Zelensky in a room and he'd solve it in 24 hours. That, of course, is complete nonsense. Um, I don't know what the diplomatic solution to the war is today, no matter who's president of the United States. I think Putin has to fight at least to a stalemate that he can justify to the Russian people and externally that he achieved his objectives, whether he did in fact or not, as long as he can say it with a straight face. And then he's going to call for a ceasefire and negotiations. I worry that may come as soon as September or October if the Ukrainian spring offensive doesn't make more progress. On the Ukrainian side, I don't see that President Zelensky has any incentive to negotiate. He's not yet in an adequate position of strength to do so. I don't think he'd have popular support from the Ukrainian people. So I'm afraid the best prediction you can make at this point is the military activity continues, even if it's in stalemate for some period of time.
Um, okay, and how do you think if Trump's way of solving the conflict might be possible? So, what possible consequences it can have for the world and Ukraine?
Well, I think if Trump is reelected, it won't be good news for Ukraine because I think his general attitude is that it interferes with better relations with Russia. And as a nuclear power, it's not an insignificant point to say we want to have some stability in the relationship with Russia. But for Trump, remember, who has no political principles, he doesn't do normal policy. How do you solve a problem like Ukraine? You make a deal. What's the deal? What would make Putin happy? Maybe it wouldn't make Zelensky happy, but he couldn't do much about it. You give Russia more territory. To Trump, it's just a question of does it take doubling the territory that Russia controls in Ukraine to satisfy Putin? Does he need a little bit more? How far can he push Zelensky? I think Zelensky, between Trump on the one hand, and I'm afraid some of the Europeans, like the French, like the Germans on the other, would be in a very difficult position against that kind of pressure from the people who are providing the bulk of the military assistance.
Okay, and why is the Russian-Ukrainian war the topic of speculation for Trump? And what does Trump want to achieve by speaking about this?
Well, I think he, as I mentioned, feels that he was mistreated and subjected to a witch hunt on the allegations of Russia collusion during the 2016 election. Which I have to say, I think people know my position on Trump pretty well. I didn't see any evidence of collusion with Russia. Maybe it's there. I didn't see it. But he feels mistreated because of that. He feels mistreated because of the impeachment. And it's a kind of vindication of him personally, not to be guilty of collusion with Russia, not to have performed adequately in resolving the conflict. So I think he would see it as kind of a test of his presidency fairly early to try and end the war. And because it's been such a focus going back really to the summer of 2019, the time of the famous perfect phone call. And I think your listeners should bear in mind, Trump knows nothing about the history of Eastern and Central Europe, nothing about uh, hundreds of years of struggle for the status of the Ukrainian people, for the Polish Empire, the Russian Empire, whatever it might be. He just looks at it as a deal that he can make today. And if he can make it, it's another success from his point of view, essentially without regard to the merits of either side of the deal.
Okay, and what is the American national interest in this war, and does Trump's approach align with this?
Well, I don't think Trump really has a concept of American national interest. I think he has a concept of Trump's interest, and that's how he measures things. I think from a more analytical point of view, uh, the breakup of the Soviet Union at the end of 1991 represented a fundamental realignment of power globally. Effectively, the end of a big piece of the Russian Empire as it had developed over the centuries. I think numerous pieces of the former empire wanted to gravitate toward the West, and I think that was entirely in their interest and in the interest of the United States. in April of 2008, President George W. Bush proposed bringing Ukraine and Georgia into NATO on a fast track. I thought that was the right decision. It was blocked by the French and the Germans. I think if membership had gone forward, I don't think there would have been an invasion in 2014 or 2022. Today, given the circumstances that we face, Russia's now had 2 acts of unprovoked aggression against Ukraine. It has yet to be rebuffed, in my view, sufficiently. The Western response in 2014 was pathetic, and I think formed part of the basis on which the Russians concluded they could get away with a second invasion in 2022. That invasion has roughly doubled the territory in Ukraine under Russian control as of the time we speak. So it's not a case where aggression has been defeated. I think if we don't defeat the Russian aggression and defeat the first Russian aggression from 2014, to do what NATO says is its goal, which is restore the full sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, the lesson that Moscow will learn is they can do this in other pieces of the former Soviet Union as well, which is bad news and destabilizing across that entire territory. And the lesson they will learn in Beijing is if the United States in particular won't defend a country on the continent of Europe against unprovoked aggression, it won't defend a country like Taiwan all the way across the Pacific against Chinese aggression. And other figures in other countries around the world will draw the same conclusion. So I think it will make the world a much more dangerous place if Russia gets away with this.